Welcome to the HFMA Talk podcast, the podcast for NHS finance.
Hi, I'm Kat Ridley, Policy Manager at the HFMA, and I'm really pleased you've joined us for this episode. Today we're looking at sustainability reporting, and I'm joined by two guests who bring their different but valuable perspectives to this conversation. First, William Hughes, Director and Climate and Nature Sustainability Services Lead at Forvis Mazars, who's experienced in working with organisations navigating emerging sustainability reporting expectations. And I'm also joined by Wendy Cheeseman, Head of Sustainability and Carbon Management at Oxford University Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust, who brings a practical insight into what effective sustainability reporting looks like in the NHS. Today's episode has been inspired by the newly updated HFMA Sustainability Reporting Briefing for 25-26, which will be released as part of our suite of year-end materials. The briefing's designed to help finance leaders in the NHS understand not only what the reporting requirements are for sustainability in 25-26, but also why it should not be seen as a standalone exercise for sustainability leads, but instead be seen as a core part of an organisation's assessment of its risks and the impacts that has on its financial resilience and strategic decision-making. Right, let's get started. So my first question to you both is, why should finance leaders engage with environmental sustainability reporting and understanding the risks climate change presents to their organisation? And William, are you okay to go first on this one?
Of course. No, thank you very much, Kat, and pleasure to be part of this podcast. First and foremost, we're in a climate emergency. We can't ever forget that. But in terms of sustainability reporting, I think it's clear that sustainability now directly affects financial performance, investor confidence, regulatory compliance, and organizational resilience. Climate-related risks, whether physical impacts like flooding or heat, or transition risks such as policy changes, have material financial consequences. Finance leaders are uniquely placed to bring rigor, controls, assurance, and audit-ready documentation to disclosures, making them credible and decision useful.
Thanks, William. Wendy, what are your thoughts on why finance leaders should engage with this?
Sure. So environmental sustainability can perhaps be seen as something that the environmental sustainability team, but for finance teams, there's many areas of climate reporting has financial aspects of it and economic aspects of it, whether it's from carbon levies and carbon tax to actually what's going to fund the transition to the low carbon economy, which will make an organisation resistant and resilient to climate change. If there's one thing that I would ask finance directors to consider, it's that sustainability or environmental sustainability reporting should always align to financial reporting. The two are completely intertwined because we are reporting on the opportunities and risks associated with the plant, property, equipment of an organisation. So environmental reporting isn't something that sits as an aside. It is entwined with and completely dependent upon the organisation's activities. So, of course, environmental reporting should absolutely align to financial reporting.
So just to follow up on that, really, to both of you, what are the potential consequences for an organisation if finance leaders do not engage with this? William, I'll come to you again first.
There's a couple of points that I could raise here, Kat. I think, firstly, there's regulatory non-compliance. This could lead to scrutiny or sanctions going forward. Remembering that these disclosures are in the front end of the narrative reporting part of the annual accounts, and therefore are incredibly important. Weaker audit readiness, meaning more challenge and potential delays at year end, could be another aspect. And then, of course, loss of trust with regulators, boards, and the public. Strategic blind spots, where risks could potentially be mispriced or missed entirely. And then, very importantly, operational inefficiencies, because fragmented ownership creates duplicated work and inconsistent data. So there's some serious consequences if they don't.
Wendy, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, that's quite interesting when William says about operational inefficiencies, because there's obviously an ongoing burgeoning social and economic costs to climate change that will be borne by organisations. And it's not just in the long term. So we tend to think about maybe climate change will affect us in the long term. It's not. It's going to affect us in the short term. As William said, with policy changes, it might be that, for example, the price of gas goes up significantly with green tax added to it. So we really need to think about what are the short term as well as the longer term impacts, and they will be both social and economic, and we need to address them.
Thanks. I think that's hopefully given people quite a lot of insight into why they should be engaging with this. I want to move on to what you think the biggest misconception finance teams might have about environmental sustainability reporting.
I think from what I'm seeing is that sustainability is, from a finance point of view, is seen as someone else's responsibility. So, and the word sustainability itself is not always fully understood. There's many who might think it's just how much we're going to recycle, and so that, what we put in the bins. So the sort of this the strategic element of sustainability and sustainability reporting is not, for me, fully understood. And I think it's quite important, because what this is it even, so sort of in reality, sustainability disclosures increasingly mirror financial reporting. I mean, it needs controls, it needs evidence trails, it needs scenario modeling, and it needs forward-looking analysis. And so the data might be different, but the required discipline is exactly the same. So we've got to get out of our mindset of that, this is someone else's responsibility. It's, yes, we do recycle, or we have renewable energy coming into it's way beyond that. And finance teams are really well positioned, because they have the rigor in place to be able to put all those things, like I said, in terms of controls, etc., to make sure that what comes out of this is again robust and credible.
Wendy, again, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
So obviously, if finance teams are looking very much that this is a reporting to be done by the environmental team, they are going to miss that sort of corporate-wide view, which is absolutely needed to answer these questions. Think about the risk across the organisation. Is the organisation prepared? And passing on to one team is not going to give that view, and you're not going to get the overall strategic leading view that you need to have.
Thanks. I think that is really key, isn't it? It's about this isn't just about, the sustainability team. Finance really do need to engage with this. Moving on a little bit to looking at what the reporting's like. William, I'm going to come to you here with all of your expertise. Could you outline briefly what TCFD reporting is? I think people might have come across the phrase but not be quite so familiar with it. Sort of what the different pillars are of TCFD reporting, and particularly what the implementation of phase 3, which is happening in England in 25-26, will mean for finance teams.
Sure. Kat, the TCFD Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures is a global framework designed to help organizations explain how climate change affects their business model, financial resilience, and long-term strategy. It was first established by the Financial Stability Board, and the TCFD provides a clear structure for transparent, decision-useful climate reporting built around the 4 pillars of governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. Across the UK and internationally, TCFD has become the foundation for climate-related reporting requirements, informing regulatory frameworks such as our own climate-related financial disclosure regulations, and now forming the backbone of the IFRS S1 and S2 sustainability disclosure standards. These standards integrate TCFD's core recommendations, making the framework central to how organizations communicate climate risks, opportunities, and financial implications. In terms of the public sector, the HM Treasury TCFD guidelines set out the UK government's phased approach for public sector climate reporting. They require organizations to disclose how climate change affects their governance, strategy, risk management, and key metrics, building towards full climate scenario analysis phase 3, which I'll give you a little bit more detail now. And of course, the phasing has been in play because the scenario analysis has been highlighted as the most complex element of the compliance. So these expectations reflect scrutiny from the UK National Audit Office, NAO, which has emphasised climate resilience and transparent risk disclosure as core responsibilities across central government and the wider public sector. So in essence, TCFD is about one question. How prepared is your organisation for the financial risks and opportunities of climate change? And can you prove it? A key component of phase 3 of the HMT TCFD guidance is to determine whether climate change is a principal risk. Is a significant component of one or neither? Because this will definitely impact the reporting requirements. If climate is not considered a principal risk or part of one, organizations must explain the rationale for this decision. But if it isn't, they don't have to report under the strategy section and the additional metrics and targets sections required under phase 3. However, I think we know in terms of the NHS, it has been declared as a principal risk. Therefore, they are in scope to report under strategy. And that is disclosures A to C and additional disclosures under metrics and targets, also A to C. Just briefly, what does strategy mean? It means including a climate scenario analysis in the disclosures. It means disclosing climate-related risks and opportunities over the short, medium, and long term. The impact of these risks and opportunities on the organization's business strategy and financial planning, and then the resilience of the organization's strategy under different climate scenarios. So all of those elements have to be disclosed under strategy, which will come from the scenario modeling. And then in terms of metrics and targets, the additional ones would be metrics that are used to assess climate-related risks and opportunities, and something which is already done, which is full scope 1, 2, and 3 greenhouse gas emissions. And then the last one, C, is targets used to manage climate-related risks and opportunities and performance against them. So those are the additional requirements. Quite a lot, what I've given you, but I think it sets the scene as to the step up of what this means for organizations.
Can I ask you, why is scenario modelling such a major change for organizations?
Kat, it is the real sort of an area which is the most complex and the most where finance colleagues won't have been across in terms of climate. So so scenario modeling and analysis is the process the organizations use to understand how different climate futures could impact their strategy and finances. It starts with identifying the most material climate risks, then selecting a set of credible climate scenarios, ranging from a net zero pathway to a high warming world. So you've got that sort of difference. So you are looking at it, what might happen if we take a net zero pathway, or what might happen if we don't, or if we take a sort of a high warming scenario. And then teams assess impacts across short, medium, and long-term horizons, and they quantify, I think that's an important point, quantify both physical and transition risks and translate those into financial implications. Those are better understood. I think everybody understands that there's violent storms and the like, but how does it impact your organization? And what is the financial impact of that, so that you can make so that decision making is easier? And then the assumptions are then stress tested with subject matter experts, and the results feed directly into strategic planning and climate disclosures. So in practice, scenario analysis enables leaders to move beyond compliance towards genuine resilience, clarifying where climate change could present major risks or emerging opportunities.
So again, that underlies what we've talked about. There's the importance of the compliance with the reporting, but actually there's the underlying reason for the reporting, which is to improve your understanding of your risks and therefore your organisational resilience.
What you find, Kat, is that a lot of organisations have got resilience measures in place, but they haven't yet mapped them to the risks because they haven't quantified those risks. So this really helps that process to be able to bring them to life and saying, ooh, yes, things like stranded assets, what Wendy was talking about now in terms of, is our estate going to be still there in 50 years' time under certain warming environments? Those are decisions that can be enhanced by doing the scenario modelling and analysis.
Wendy, if I could come across to you next on just a slightly different tangent, which is not all of the 4 nations in the UK have implemented the TCFD recommendations yet, or they're at differing stages. So if we've got some people listening to the podcast from the other nations who aren't as far along in implementation as England is, or maybe haven't really started implementing this at all yet, does that mean they don't need to be thinking about this because, it's not in the guidance, they don't need to report on it this year, so actually we can park it for now?
That's a good question, Kat. And all sorts of things spring to mind, like chance favours a prepared mind, and the early bird catches the worm, and a stitch in time saves 9, all the rest of it. So regardless of whether or not you have to report on this, or you're being asked to report on it, surely we realise that climate change we're seeing the effects and the impacts of climate change already. There's more heat waves. We know the impact it's having on our patients' health. So if you're in a healthcare trust in one of the devolved nations, then even if you do not have to, as yet, report against the TCFD framework, surely you want to make sure that your organisation is becoming prepared for and resilient to the impacts of climate change and the impact that is going to have on the operation of your hospital, your healthcare trust, because it is going to get hotter. Your patients, your more vulnerable patients, are going to be feeling those impacts. You are going to have to adjust your estate to be resilient to climate change and, for example, heat waves and periods of wet weather. Example, your supply chains will be disrupted. Your staff may struggle coming to work on those days. You are going to have more people presenting with certain illnesses on hot days. So regardless of what the regulations require you to do it this year, next year, or whenever, climate change is on its way and you need to have a plan in place to address it.
Yeah, so compliance with the reporting is important, but not for the reporting itself, but because of the meaning behind it and why it's important to report on it. Yeah, great. I'm going to stay with you on this one, Wendy, if that's okay. What should be on the Director of Finance's timeline between now and the annual report and account sign-off?
So as our listeners may know, the initial sign-off will be on the 27th of April, followed by the 26th of June for the full account sign-off. If I was a Director of Finance, what I'd be doing right at the moment is maybe thinking about getting together, if I hadn't already, a mini task force that will be finance staff, operations staff, sustainability staff, and absolutely estates and facilities staff, as well as that sustainability team, because this is impacting everybody and we all need to consider the risk. Would not be the role of myself to sit there and think, what are all the risks across the clinical areas? I am not going to know that as a sustainability professional. I'm not a nurse, I'm not a doctor, I don't work in the clinical side. So it's really important that all aspects of the organisation are represented, are thinking about the risks, have registers of risks, and have a strategy in place for what plans we need to have and develop. And the sooner that happens, the better. This is not it's the 26th of April, needs to be in tomorrow, let's ring our head of sustainability. It is not that issue. It is a much bigger issue. It has got to have board oversight, and we need to start right now if you haven't already.
Great. I think that's really useful for people to reflect on. Linked to that, and I'll come to William first and then I'll come to you, Wendy. What are the key organisational behaviours, do you think, that drive good quality sustainability reporting?
Kat, and I think Wendy highlighted the importance of clear ownership across all functions. So it's not, sustainability it's a joint responsibility. Data discipline, very important. Integrated planning where sustainability informs strategy and finance as well is really, really critical here. Transparency around uncertainty, because when you're looking at scenario modeling, you're not going to have a situation where this is it's not a prediction. It's assumptions are put into play where and providing sort of outcomes, that possible outcomes from those assumptions. And I think the last one is a commitment to continuous. Last one from me is a commitment to continuous improvement, because this is not a one-off sort of reporting exercise. It's a continuous where one improves, data gets better, the modeling gets better, and therefore decision making gets better on the back of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Wendy, what would you add to that?
Sure. So in the first place, obviously, awareness beyond just the sustainability team. So awareness at board level that can then be devolved down to different disciplines. So awareness of what is needed and awareness of what needs to do and awareness of who needs to contribute, and also data that you're collecting already that might be useful where you might need to make tweaks. So with additional reporting, hopefully for many people, it's not going to be lots of additional work. It's going to be a tweak to the data that they already collect. We collect a lot of data within the NHS, and sometimes when I'm doing analysis, I discover somebody else has a data set that I can use, and I maybe have something, and we can just cross-reference both, and it gives a completely different picture. But we've been currently collecting things for totally different purposes, but when we bring it together, it gives a new scenario or a new information that we can act on. So making sure that data is readily available to collect, that we share data. And I think actually also across our system, a system-wide approach, so across our integrated sort of care systems, where we can share knowledge and learn from each other is really useful, and see what happens across maybe the primary care setting and maybe some of the community health trusts, to just see what works and how we can integrate more with each other across maybe some shared risks that we have on our patch.
Yeah, I think that's key. And I know that's something we've discussed previously about, within the NHS, us all learning from each other, looking at what other people are doing in sustainability reporting and what's working well, and looking to sort of replicate some of that, and then sticking with some of the bits that you think you're doing better. So that, as William says, it evolves, you continuously improve. I'm also getting from both of you something that I think a lot of finance people will be familiar with already, getting the teams together, being very clear about deadlines, being clear about responsibilities, and finance teams will be well used to working to a fairly detailed financial accounts timetable for the year end. So having something similar for sustainability reporting just means there is that absolute clarity across the organisation, who's doing which bits, so that it can all come together a bit easier than one poor person running around chasing everybody for different bits of information. Just moving on a bit, and William, I'm going to ask you this question with your background, really, and then this is, I think, something that our members have a level of concern about, which is auditing and sustainability reporting. And what are auditors looking at, and what are they already challenging in sustainability reporting disclosures?
From a TCFD point of view, it's still quite a new topic. So that's sort of it's evolving. But I think the most the important aspect is what auditors look at is the inconsistencies between sustainability disclosures and financial narratives. So that they can't be disconnected. And I think that's sort of a really important aspect. Other areas around what we've seen is the sort of unsupported assumptions in scenario analysis, so that that's very clear that if you go through a process, you have a very well documented trail of how you've got to where you've got to. Missing evidence trails, especially for emissions and energy data, and especially around emission factors, we find an area that's important. Governance claims not reflected in minutes or decisions. So that sort of demonstrates the governance of this topic. And then risk statements that are too qualitative. So they haven't, there's no financial value at risk. That's across some of the risk statements. So those are sort of some of the points that. But as I say, the topic is evolving, and there'll be more and more scrutiny across it as the maturity grows.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, yes, we will start to get more of a feel for what the auditors are looking at and what they're questioning. And I think it's just the unknown. People are quite familiar with what auditors are looking at when it comes to the finances. And we're aware of the areas where they're going to sort of ask more questions. As you said, that consistency across the reporting is really where they're looking. Wendy, I know a lot of this conversation has been aimed at finance staff and finance leaders and trying to engage them in this topic. But what does this mean for, say, a nurse or a porter or a surgeon or someone working in HR that's working in the NHS? You know, what does sustainability reporting mean for them and what they're doing?
Sure. So if I think about sort of frontline services, we know that when there's going to be an extreme of temperature, for example, we are going to have a significant number of vulnerable people presenting to us within ED. So what that ultimately means is it's going to be extreme or stressful, rushed, resource intensive at the front door of the hospital. And that waves out onto all of us, from porters to nurses to surgeons, clinical staff, etc. So if I were a nurse or a surgeon, I'd be thinking, actually, what is this organisation going to be doing to support this going forward? Who is going to be planning for such events? Are we going to be prepared for when we know that it's going to be a heatwave week and we have those extra resources in place to support the increased pressure at frontline? And also, if I was worked in procurement, where are our supply chains? Where are supply chains located? What happens if there's going to be intense flooding in the city centre or somewhere else? Can all of our blood tests still happen? Can all of our equipments come in? What are the logistical implications of climate change? So this is actually something that affects everybody, and I'd encourage anyone who works in the NHS to just pause and think, how actually is climate change going to affect me and my job? And it does impact on all of us. There is no job role that will escape the impact of climate change, whether it's sitting in your office, ordering items, being extremely hot, or whether it's dealing with an unprecedented number of people presenting in A&E who are suffering from the impacts of an extreme weather event.
Thanks, Wendy. I think you've really drawn the picture there that this isn't somebody else's problem. This is going to impact on all of us, and we all need to be thinking about this and prepared for it, which I think links nicely to my final question, which I'm going to take to William, so for the finance leaders who are listening to this, what do you think are the first few steps they should take after listening to this podcast, particularly if they're listening to this podcast and thinking, I'm not sure I'm prepared for this? What should they be doing?
First and foremost, I think, and Wendy has already alluded to this, the first thing I would do after listening to this is I would gather a multidiscipline team consisting of finance, risk, IT operations, HR, and sustainability, and confirm governance roles within that. Who's going to do what? I would map the requirements and consider what gaps I have. So I would do a gap analysis against the TCFD requirements. I would validate data sources and ownership. I would prioritize scenario analysis because it's a fairly long process. Time to as we've heard on the reporting timetable is tight. I would talk to the auditors early so that they are understanding of where you are and where you are on the journey, and then I would brief the board on readiness and risks, because those are this is new, and I think that's really important that the board is across this. So that's what I would do if I was listening to this.
Thanks, William. Wendy, is there anything you'd want to add into that?
Yes, if I took some advice to a finance director, I would probably say, what is your budget for dealing with climate change? Because the cost of dealing with it is going to far exceed probably any investment that you can put in early doors to try and mitigate against this. So as mentioned, transition to a low carbon economy is going to take investment. Now there is government funding available, but those windows open as and when, and it's not clear cut that they can continue. So I would say, yes, how are you going to invest in dealing with this problem or trying to mitigate against the impact of this problem, because it's going to cost an awful lot more down the line.
Yeah. Thank you, both of you. I think that brings us to the end of today's episode. I'd like to say a huge thank you to both of you for such thoughtful contributions and for helping make what I think feels like quite a complex area to most of us a lot clearer. I hope that if finance leaders take one thing away from this, it's that sustainability reporting is central to understanding your organisation's climate-related risks and to its financial and operational resilience. And I think William and Wendy, you've both given a really clear steer on what the practical next step should be if people haven't yet given this much thought. So thank you to everyone for listening. I hope you found it informative and helpful.
That's it for this week's episode of HFMA Talk. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed the show, we'd love for you to leave a 5-star rating on your favourite podcast platform. See you next time.